what I believe in. And I use ProPure in my home and my office. And I recommend that you check out the information on ProPure at INFOWARS.com. We already have the lowest price at INFOWARS.com on the ProPure gravity filter system. But when you add in the 10% off when InfoWarriors use the product code WATER at InfoWars.com, nobody can top it. So again, it's a win-win-win. Stop drinking the poison water, checkmate the globalists when it comes to your health, and support InfoWars.com and the work we're doing here. You know, many revolutionaries rob banks and things and kidnap people for funds. We promote in the free market the products we use that are about preparedness. That's how we fund this revolution against the New World Order in our move to restore our constitutional republic and a spirit of 1776 worldwide. Check it out at InfoWars.com. ProPure, top of the line, #1, most powerful and effective and economical gravity-fed water system in the world. ProPure, available, discounted at InfoWars.com. Don't forget product code WATER to save 10%. It's the latest generation, years in development. ProPure is the name.
Ehrlich.
Okay, all right.
I'm Aaron Dykes. We are back from break on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Come on, man. Let's do this.
Should I say my name a little slower?
No, just say welcome back.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Aaron Dykes, on the InfoWars Nightly News. Now, we talked before about the escalating police state, and unfortunately, there's just more and more evidence of it. As we go into that, I want to remind you in our daily quote of the words of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and that is that those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. And we turn now to our news and see that this is, in fact, surely happening because new microchip knows your location to within centimeters. That's on new smartphones, a new chip they're going to be putting in there. Forget the chip on your forehead, Paul Joseph Watson writes. It's going to be in your phone, and it can track you down to just a few centimeters, less than inches, less than feet. It will know what floor you're on in buildings. It's going to totally track you. And just remember, all these cell phone companies already got caught secretly tracking the logs. They've also had police departments, especially in the UK, I think also in the US, who've been taking cell phone data from drivers on routine stops without a warrant, and surely doing that as well from various types of suspects. With the effort to legally establish surveillance drones further, the efforts to legally establish surveillance drones as a legitimate tool in domestic law enforcement could aid authorities in saving a lot of time and money, especially if they can just ask the cell phone companies for a log of all the location data. And if they're taking the cell phone data, as we've already discussed, how much would it take for them to put together a total tracking timeline for anyone who's a suspect or a political dissident or anyone else they want to put on the sidelines? And indeed, you've got Apple, Google, Microsoft, all the other companies working behind the scenes with law enforcement to make it happen. Just takes us one step closer. Meanwhile, ordinary American life, forget it. They're cracking down on that, too. What's going on in Roswell? Not aliens. We're talking about Roswell, Georgia, where Andrew Words is now dead after more than 4 years of harassment over his backyard chickens. He was finally evicted via county marshals. There's some kind of explosion. It resulted in the loss of his life. A real tragedy there and a real encroachment on rights. Rob Dew and Mike Adams from Natural News, who hosted the show today, are going to get into that in detail in an interview coming up. But just another outrageous case. Meanwhile, photos have surfaced from training by the U.S. Army to do riot control. We've got a photo montage of that. There's a similar exercise by the National Guard from May 2010. And, of course, we already knew from 2008 that the Army War College, as you see these photos of them getting ready for people begging for food, demanding to be let into what I guess FEMA facilities to get their food rations. Well, you've got the IMF warning of economic riots back in 2008. You've got the Army War College warning that the country must prepare for civil unrest. This has been brewing for some time. They know that this economic crisis is going to go on, and people are going to get more and more desperate. Notice that sign, food now. So in this training exercise, as you see these photos, you've got them specifically doing a hunger game, expecting people to be starving and desperate and ready to turn themselves into government for anything they can get. But they're going to set up riot control police, and you probably won't even get what you were promised, even if you give in to government. Meanwhile, you've got U.S. protesters increasingly being treated like terrorists under Israeli-style repression. You've got Press TV interviewing an American. His name is Alan Rowland, discussing how the cops who are pepper spraying college students and clamping down on them and treating them like there's some kind of unrest element just because they're protesting things like student tuition, love, hate, or indifferent to the issue. They are being treated under these counterterrorism measures. And why are police being trained by Mossad agents as though we're dealing with terrorists? Well, it just shows the response that they really want to end this country, clamp down on dissidents of all kind. And in fact, it just sprang to mind one small example from back in 2008, where here in Austin, Texas, you had counterterrorism experts from Israel coming to train our police forces here in the country. I've got that article here from News 8 Austin, again from 2 years ago, but it just shows how you've got a country in a volatile part of the world, a definite clash of cultures between Israeli lifestyle and the other countries in the Middle East, where certainly they have violence. And indeed, they quote in this article, the Israeli people grow up to think in the back of their head something is always out to harm them, so they're very careful. Goes on to say how they're very used to dealing with the stress of terror, but they're essentially transplanting that here in the United States, bringing that terror home. They could have ended the war on terror, started for bogus, fraudulent reasons in the first place years ago, but instead they decided to turn the tables, label returning veterans, spy upon dissidents, question political speech, question those with bumper stickers, question supporters of Ron Paul and the other third-party candidates, and now they've got the riot police in position to clamp down on society with that larger brand, that regular American life is somehow now terrorism. And it's not even just political activity, it's lemonade stands and all the rest of it. These backyard chickens, it just makes me sick. And so next in our news stack is more calls for global government and for global population control. Urian Massan's article, Ehrlich, Hansen, Lovelock, we must build an entirely new kind of global society. And so you've got the United Nations Environmental Program, who's published their, quote, key messages from these top eugenicists, from these top climate change advocates saying it's all man-made. That's Paul Ehrlich, who worked with John P. Holdren, who's currently in the White House. He's the one who wrote Population Bomb, itself an overdriven model to sell people on population control. You've got the climate guy, James Lovelock, who says we should have fewer than 1 billion people, ideally. And you've got NASA's James Hansen, who's always running scrimmage for the data, trying to sell the public on it. And they say in their new report, Environment and Developing Changes, the imperative to act, that the UN at its upcoming 2012 Earth Summit should push for global government population control. Globally, we must find a better means to agree and implement measures to achieve collective goals. They go on to say, in the face of an absolutely unprecedented emergency, society has no choice but to take dramatic action to avert a collapse of civilization. Either we will change our ways and build an entirely new kind of global society, or they will be changed for us. Does this sound familiar? We just covered this yesterday in the Peak Civilization article, where they predict a dramatic decline in the population starting in the year 2030, when they predict an all-out global collapse economically, food, resources-wise, and otherwise, driving a larger population decline. And they say it's an emergency, therefore the only way to avert it is to buy into this global government scheme. And so you've got the Club of Rome, a eugenicist oligarchical meeting group, pushing for this 40 years ago. You've got Paul Ehrlich with the population bomb pushing this 40 years ago. And it all ties into what we see this year, this convoy of United Nations vehicles and other NGO vehicles all trying to take us down the same road to global government to save us from ourselves, to save the earth. And so let's look at some of the quotes. Where are they trying to go with a globally run population program? Well, we have to look no further than ecoscience, which is Paul Ehrlich, named in this article, who is part of these quotes, and John P. Holdren, who's the White House science czar, who we've covered at length. Coercive fertility control, they write in Ecoscience, the development of a long-term sterilizing capsule could be implanted under the skin and removed when pregnancy is desired. It opens additional possibilities for coercive fertility control. They want to keep everyone from breeding unless you're authorized. Indeed, they go on to say, it's been concluded that compulsory population control laws, even including laws requiring compulsory abortion, could be sustained under the existing Constitution. They're talking about the United States of America, folks. If the population can't be brought under control, they go on to say. There's even more quotes from Ecoscience. And here's where they begin to get into how we need a planetary regime, a global government, in other words, to regulate population. What do they say? Perhaps those agencies combined with the United Nations Environmental Program, the very group named in today's article, and the United Nations population agencies, of which there's a few, might eventually be developed into a planetary regime, sort of international super agency for population, resources, and environment. This should sound very close to the Club of Rome's proposals and these studies coming out of MIT where they say because of diminishing resources, because of them not embracing alternatives, that's going to trigger a population decline. So Ehrlich and Holdren go on to describe the planetary regime, or the world government they want to set up. Such a comprehensive planetary regime could control the development, administration, conservation, distribution of all natural resources, including food on the international market. What are they talking about? They're talking about restricting access to food to control the population. It goes on. The planetary regime might be given responsibility for determining the optimum population for the world and for each region, and for arbitrating various countries' shares within their regional limits. They're talking about giving food rations in proportion to the population. And what will they do if you have too many people in the population? You won't get the food. It goes on because this is an older idea. Bertrand Russell espoused virtually the same idea in 1953, long before Ecoscience came out. An International Food Authority, Bertrand Russell writes, could be used to deal with this problem of increasing population and decreasing food supplies. It will be necessary to find ways of preventing an increase of world population. And he goes on. If this is to be done other than by wars, pestilence, and famines, it will demand a powerful international authority, basically the same as this planetary regime they're talking about. The quote goes on. This authority should deal out the world's food to the various nations in proportion to their population. If any nation subsequently increased its population, it should not on that account receive any more food. The motive for not increasing population would therefore be very compelling. And what a dangerous hunger game it is. Henry Kissinger says almost the same thing in his National Security Memo number 200 in the early 70s about food as a weapon. Family planning, performance, and population control should be taken into account for appraisal of assistance requirements by USAID. They're talking about administering food to developing world nations and withholding food if they don't curb their population. And it goes on. Would food be considered an instrument of national power? Is the U.S. prepared to accept food rationing to help people who can't or won't control their population growth? So